All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of the RELOOK Advisory Committee. We had a quick turnaround from our public meeting last week. I know a few of you were there, but probably not everyone. So we're going to pull up our PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk through our agenda for the evening. Give us just a minute.
Thanks, everybody. I'll share the PowerPoint again.
All right. Can you go to the next slide, please? Just click on the screen. All right. So the main goal for tonight is to develop some alternative urban growth boundaries that we are going to bring to the public on January 9th. But first, what we're going to do is do a little recap of what we heard from the community at the public meeting last week, as well as what we're seeing from community members online. Then we, the 3J team has, in consultation with staff, has drafted a couple proposed alternatives, but those are just to get the discussion started. It'll really be up to all of you as to what alternatives we want to hear back from the community on January 9th. And then we'll finish up by talking a little bit about that upcoming public meeting on January 9th. And we have some time for public comment, and then we'll send you all home. So I will mention that all of you seated here received a draft summary of the results of the public meeting and the online survey. It was a very quick turnaround for us. So what we have in there are the maps and the comments people made on the maps, and the from the online survey, the charts of percentages of people who answered the questions, and then the maps from that. What we don't have, but what we will post to the website in early January, is all of the comment forms that people filled out at the public meeting. We scanned those. We'll attach those to the summary. We are going to keep the online survey open through the month of December. So in early January, hopefully January 3rd is my goal, we will post everything for you all to see. And we'll kind of update this summary document with the rest of that information. But we thought it was important for you to have this tonight, and you can review it in the coming weeks. But we're also going to present that information. So let's go to the next slide. Actually, 2 slides probably. So for those of you who don't know, the main purpose or the main activity that we had at the public meeting was a mapping activity. Now, we started with a brief overview of all the information you all have heard before, but we really condensed it down a lot because we presented a lot of that information at the first community meeting. But we knew we'd have some people who hadn't participated before. So we did a brief recap of some of that background materials. And then we asked people to, at their tables, to discuss these 3 questions you see up here. First, and there was a little bit of contextual information before each one, but first, what does North Plains need to become a more complete city? Second was a question about the homes and open spaces. Should North Plains expand its UGB for more homes and open spaces? And the third was related to employment. Should North Plains expand its UGB to include more commercial and industrial development? If yes, how many acres of employment should be added? So we asked people to talk about those. Those are the same questions that we have on the online survey. We asked people on their maps to write down some of the key points of their discussion that helped drive how they did the mapping activity. For the mapping activity, each table had pieces of paper in squares that represented acres and were scaled to the map. So they had the full 127 acres of housing, they had 40 acres of parks, and they had 688 acres of employment. We asked them and their tables to go ahead and place those acres. They could place as few or as many as they wanted on how they would like to see an urban growth boundary expansion look. Again, we couldn't do the exact same activity online, but it's pretty similar, a mapping activity where you can click on the map and say, I want housing here, or I want employment here, or I don't want anything here. So that's the activity that people engaged in. Oh, sorry, go to the next slide, please, Steve. You can see we had these acre pieces, 50 acres, 20 acres, and 5 acres, and that's how we went about that activity. Next slide, I'm gonna go through the maps that we received and then maybe make just a few observations about them. So this is from the first table. You can see that they had a large, the entire, I think, allocation. By the way, people did have scissors, so they could cut into smaller pieces, but this group put the whole housing allocation to the north. They have some parks on the western portion of the east sub area where there's wetlands and riparian areas along the stream there. And then they put a lot of employment uses in that east sub area leading up to Jackson School Road. Next slide, please. The second table also had some, although not as much, but residential to the north along with the park kind of adjacent to that reservoir. Oh, thanks. They said they did not want to expand to the south. And then they had a mixture of residential and employment to the east. I will just restate quickly, because I don't think I did a great job at the public meeting. But one of the rules we gave folks is that if you wanted to expand the urban growth boundary, you need to include that area to the south first, because that's how state law works. And people ask me why, and I did an okay job, but I think it's important that people understand the reason that that area is the first priority is because everything north, all the expansion area or north of the highway is farmland. And the state planning program is set up to protect farm and forest land. So that's why that southern area, which has some residential uses, some commercial and industrial uses, that's why the state says that's the area that needs to go in first. We can get into more detail about that if people want to, but I just thought that I could restate it a little more simply, and that would be helpful.
But there's no way that, I mean, we have to bring that in first. Is there a have to, a must, or?
So that land is the first priority. So the land to the west around the airport, the airstrip, that land is also exception. It's mostly residential, right? So it has the same treatment. But because of the airstrip, we were able to make the case to the state that that's not going to be very useful for getting more residential development. That area to the west, and we included all the parcels that are tied by deed to the airstrip. That's how we drew the line. That area, that other area that I'm saying needs to come in first, the city could try to make a case for the same thing. It's just going to be a lot more difficult, right? So there's a risk that it's how much risk you want to take in terms of submitting a proposal and then having the state or others appeal it and say, no, you didn't do it right. You didn't do it the way you're supposed to. So I'm not going to say the city can't, but it's a much more difficult case to make.
You were saying that that's a priority. Does that mean it's a priority to include in the plan? Or does it mean it's a priority to develop that first? In other words,
Yes.
You could put it aside and say, this is, we included in the plan because it was a priority to include in the plan, but we're not going to do anything with it for, 15 years or whatever.
Well, I will say, so first it's the priorities for when you're looking to expand your urban growth boundary. First is urban reserves. We've talked about North Plains has no urban reserves. Second, also first is this exception land, or these lands that have these not farm and forest designations. Then it goes on to low value farmland and then high value farmland. So that's kind of how the priorities go. Everything north of the highway is high value farmland. So after that southern area, everything else was treated the same. In terms of bringing it into the urban growth boundary, it's not really a decision that the city makes when it gets developed. That's up to property owners. The city makes a decision about what's inside or outside their urban growth boundary, but property owners have the right to say, no, I'm not going to do anything with my property. So it's really not a city, development is not a city-driven process, but the urban growth boundary is.
That's.
Go ahead. Well, we had Eric and then Rudy, and then.
I was mostly asking if any residents explained why they wouldn't want that specific parcel of land.
We did have some residents here at the public meeting, and there's a few homes that are just to the west of, they're not tied to the airport, but they're right next to them, and they very logically said, well, why didn't you draw the line on the other side of us? And again, we said, because these other properties are tied to the airstrip. And for us to make the case that the current south area shouldn't be brought into the urban growth boundary is going to be a difficult one to make. And those people basically just didn't want to see commercial or industrial development kind of backed right up to their homes. All pretty logical.
You know, prior to the last UGB expansion, we're talking 25 years ago, that was exception land then, as was the airstrip area. And there were landowners and proponents back then that wanted that to be the area we expanded onto. And we made an argument back then with DLC agreed that we shouldn't divide a city by a freeway. We have the choice not to go south of the freeway. Made no sense. I mean, if you were developing that, kids would have to walk across the freeway to get to a school and go to shopping, and every trip to the grocery store, the gas station, or wherever they went would have to be an automobile driven. If they were successful in bypassing that land as exception land.
Yeah.
So my argument is something changed with state law that you couldn't still make that similar argument, and that all expansion will occur on one side of a freeway.
So I'm gonna give a quick answer, and one thing that's different, and then I'm gonna ask Kevin Young from DLCD to give DLCD's perspective. But I think the key difference is that the last urban growth boundary expansion was all residential. I think we could still today make a case that we shouldn't put residential down there, and I think we get support for that. But I don't think we have a strong case to say there shouldn't be any commercial or industrial development. That's fair. Kevin, could you give any thoughts you have on this issue?
Thanks for the opportunity, Steve. Yeah, and I was at the table when we had some of these conversations. The other piece that I recall is looking at serviceability, if urban infrastructure could be extended to that area, and the answer is yes. And we've got a good connection to the rest of the city. And so I think working collaboratively, we were able to determine the airport properties really don't make sense. There's not a lot of opportunity for development there, but commercial employment uses in that area are certainly viable. They exist there now. So yeah, that's why it was included.
Thank you, Kevin.
When folks are speaking, can you please state your name so everybody is aware of who's speaking? Thank you.
Steve Faust speaking again. Sherry?
Oh, Sherry Simmons and Rudy, so
Asked you.
eloquently asked my question, so thank you.
Great. Let's go to the next slide.
Steve, this is Glenn Bolin online here with ODOT.
Thanks, Glenn. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey there. On that property out of that area in question, when I first looked at this, I also, concurred with that thought that why would you want to, cross a freeway with your city? Most cities don't want freeways going through the middle of them. So I think we are just kind of in that spot of, well, the law does recommend or require that we first look at non-resource lands. So it's a trade-off. I think from a transportation standpoint, it's not ideal to urbanize it. We also, just so folks know, ODOT has access control on Glencoe there. So, our concern is we wouldn't want to have, some kind of use come in, like let's say, heaven forbid, a large retail use that brings people from all over, from banks and everywhere beyond, and causes safety and other problems at the interchange. So we have certain controls in place that might limit some of the development that might go there. But I tend to concur with the gentleman who I couldn't see the screen, but who was talking about the concern about having stuff across a freeway from the rest of your town.
Thanks, Glenn. So here's our next map. You can see this one has residential and parks to the north, has that southern area with employment uses, and residential and employment to the west. It's fairly similar to the UGB expansion recommendation. with the exception that there's none of that land to the west included. Next one, please. This one had no residential to the north, unlike the other ones, but did want to see a park there, employment to the south, and then some employment and residential and parks to the east, including a little patch down by the Jackson School Road interchange. I will just note that when expanding an urban growth boundary, one of the things the state's going to be looking for is continuity. So having that piece down by the interchange, but not connecting to the rest of the community would probably be problematic. Next, please. Here's another one. Didn't have any residential, had some parks again in those resource areas, and employment to the south and to the east. Next, please. This group said no growth. We did not put anything down on their map. Next, please. And then this last one just had the employment to the south. And so just a couple of quick observations. Those were the maps. None of the maps had any development in the western sub area. So I think that's one observation. I think all of the maps that showed growth in the north was all residential and parks. I don't think we saw any employment up there. Of those who included growth to the east, most of them want to see, open space in those riparian areas, and then had a mixture, a lot of employment, but also some mixture of housing and employment. There were several maps that also had a park somewhere around that reservoir to the north. So that's some quick observations there. Let's go to the next slide. Go ahead. So we asked those 3 questions, if you recall. But the first one was an open-ended question. So we don't have those results to share today. We're gonna have to download those. Those will be included with the one that asked, what does North Plains need to be a more complete community? We'll have those for you in early January. But the second question said, should North Plains expand its UGB to allow more homes and public spaces? And you can see that 71% of respondents said, do not expand the UGB for those for homes and parks. And about 29% said, yes, expand for homes and parks. I wanna also, just so people have it in mind, we have pretty small sample sizes right now. So the information that we're getting tonight is to help inform your decision-making. But I don't think we should take anything as the community definitively said X, Y, or Z.
Steve, this is Terry Lenihan. Do you have the number, do you have numbers, data, like how many people actually took the survey? Do you have that information?
We do. When we get to the maps, I might be able to and I'll make sure that that's definitely posted, included in the summary. Again, I apologize. I knew we'd have some gaps because of the short turnaround. But I think when we get to the mapping activity online, we can see some numbers and figure out how many people took it. But I think it's definitely like less than 30. It's somewhere between 20 and 30, I believe. Say your name, please.
Larry Gonzalez. And the maps are great, a lot of work, thank you. One thing that I'm looking at it and going, this means a little bit to me, but it would be more meaningful to me if I had a cost associated with this. Okay, so here's a map of stuff, and infrastructure wise, this is what it's going to cost the city to do this for these samples, because some of the stuff, we don't have the infrastructure on the west side that we do on the east side.
Yeah.
And so there's a cost associated with that. And I think it would be good to know when making a decision about, should we expand or not, and where and how, and what's it going to cost the city, and how we're going to pay for it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll say at our first meeting, we did present, we don't have like dollar costs, and we presented this at the public meeting last week. But there is the UGB report that was done in September 2023 that has information on the comparison of the west to the north to the east to the south. And well, we know the south is priority 1 to come in. And in terms of their development readiness. The east was the most ready, the north was the second most ready, and the west was the least ready to come into the urban growth boundary. I don't know, Bill, do you have anything you want to say about costs to the city? Because I know to some degree development's going to pay for a lot of expansion, but that's not my area of expertise.
I mean, thank you, Larry. It's kind of a tough question to delve into because right now, all we really can do is draw the line. Trying to figure out how much land and the types of uses. But until we get into like actual concept planning, know where the line's gonna be, that's the process that kind of figures out, here's where the main water line needs to be, here's where city streets need to be. Generally speaking, the city would finance this kind of like we have before and no other cities do it. New development pays system development charges, they pay fees to the city that we then take and use to pay for new infrastructure. The state's a partner sometimes on some of that. We structure it differently for housing versus, employment uses. So I think what we could do is probably help with information about, how the infrastructure would get paid, but until we kind of get delved into the uses a bit more, it's hard to kind of start talking numbers in a way.
Right, but the readiness piece,
That's in the report.
That's important.
Yeah.
The information we're sharing with this.
And that's absolutely correct. The east side and then even kind of north, with Brimhill developing, heading immediately northwest of that, we're already kind of equipped to continue water, continue street network. And it's largely the same going east as well. The west side, other side of Gordon, that's the longest, that would be often the future construction cost numbers that are way in the future and higher, all that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I did just notice there are survey respondent numbers on these graphics in your report. So it looks like this question, 24 people answered and 2 skipped. Sorry, I can't see it exactly right. Let's go to the next slide.
Can I ask you a question?
Real quick.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Hey, real quick.
This is Tom. Yeah.
So I was at home and I took this survey in the last meeting. I don't want to be overly negative, but I don't know how valid these results are because anybody, anywhere can log in and take it. You can log in and take it as many times as you want. So I don't know that we can use how valid something is when you don't know who's answering the questions and who the population is.
Yeah, we come
So
across.
you could have, it could be like one of those online things, you're allowed to vote 10 times or something like that, you have the same person vote 10 times.
Yeah. We come across this question a lot. It's very challenging to lock down a survey just to certain people. We always feel it's more important to encourage people to take these surveys. I have never, I'm not to say it couldn't happen, but I've never really come across a situation where people are stacking a survey. We can look at IP addresses to see if someone's taken, or a household. The reason we don't limit people is because what if 2 people in a household want to take the survey? We don't want to limit that, but we can look at the IP addresses and see if there's been, someone's taken it 20 times. We can take that into account. And then I'll just say again, none of this should be taken as this is what the community is saying. It should inform your decision-making when we get to that point. But thank you for raising that.
I think in the community.
I defer my question to Tom.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I watched, because I was here, and the group I was with were all citizens of the city of North Plains. And if you look up there, all the home acreage was included, all the east industrial area was included in our, nothing to the west. And that was all people that live within the city, agreed upon it. Now, I watched tables over here, not all people from the city. And they, through their thoughts, even though there was one individual that wanted to develop and wanted homes and wanted the same, and they just threw her under the bus. And so it was, and then we had groups that were not citizens that didn't want. And I have a really hard time when I listen to people, we don't want growth, we don't want this, but you live a mile away from the city. And I don't think it's fair that, to me, that I'm allowing somebody that doesn't pay taxes to this city to have the right to voice the opinion. That's my opinion, but
I appreciate it. I appreciate that. And I don't know if Bill wants to say anything about that, but I will add that in addition to the tables, the group exercise, because what we really wanted is people to kind of engage in conversation and see where they could come to some agreement. Each individual also received a comment form. And again, we've scanned those. We're going to share those with you. We just weren't ready to print all those out tonight, but we'll go ahead and email those to you ahead of early January. We can email those to you. So people were able to fill out individual if they had a problem with their group not coming to some agreement. Jeff, go ahead.
I love your question, thank you, and your observation.
Name?
Is your sense?
Can you say your name?
Oh, Jacqueline Hunt. Can you tell your sense when people are answering this question, do they have the context for the next 20 years? For the next 20 years, did GB grow? And we really think that 70% of people say that we should not grow at all in the next 20 years. Do you think that there's that interpretation?
Yeah.
Because it's not stated explicitly in the question.
Right. Each survey, I only included the actual question sentence, but there was information leading into each of these questions that gave the context that I think people need to answer that question. So I think people, I don't know, did they have all the information they need? I don't know, but they definitely had, we gave some information to give the context of why we're asking this question. Okay. Thanks.
And I guess I'm just gonna challenge the idea that it only needs to be people who live in the city limits, as I represent all the unincorporated 97133 people, because for all of us Hill people, everything we do is still tied into North Plains. And I think that's something that is unique to North Plains compared to other areas like Beaverton or Hillsborough. If you don't live there, or if you've gotten a limit, your kid's going to a different school, you're shopping somewhere else, you're doing something somewhere else. Because we are surrounded by rural land, everything I do is still in North Plains. This is still my school district for my children. This is still where I would be going to church as the closest church. This is still where I would be going shopping. Like, everything is tied in just as much as it is for you, aside from the fact that my house just happens to exist on Mason Hill compared to further down Jackson School. So I don't want to just discount the people outside just because we're outside of this little line that's drawn on a piece of paper. We're still a member of the community just as much as anybody else, being as involved just as much as anyone else.
Thanks, Emily. Bill, do you have any thoughts to share on this topic?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, I would just underscore what you said a little while ago, Steve, and that is that this is all input and it's for this body to consider and think about and chew on as you work through this. But what I would say about this body is it was very intentionally pulled together to have opponents who voted against, and people who couldn't vote, and somebody who was from outside of the city in 97133. We have somebody who was on the south side of the freeway study area. He couldn't make it tonight, but he's a smart guy and he's on top of this, so I'm sure he'll watch this later. But the bottom line is this is the place to talk about that. So if you have thoughts, please, express them. You're here, and we wanted you to be here because you clearly had a viewpoint coming into this meeting or this process, and so we really want to hear from you. So please do step up and speak about whatever it is you are seeing.
Daniel Smithfield. I understand what you're saying, but my kids all went through school here too, and they went to Hillsborough, and they went to college in a lot of other places. But a lot of interaction with Hillsborough. I would not want Hillsborough planning North Plains, period. I think it's good that we have people from outside our community that give input. But as far as voting on or saying this is how they want North Plains to go, I really don't see that, because I wouldn't want Hillsborough telling North Plains. They tried it. If you go back in history, they tried it 50 years ago. They wanted North Plains not to exist. And I don't like the way Hillsborough's grown. So would I want those people impacting how this city grows? No. I love hearing from outside what people want here. That's great. But as far as what we do in our expansions and stuff, as far as the landowners inside the UGB, absolutely. I want to listen to them. But somebody lives 7 miles away from here in Elevation, I could give them. I won't say it, but I don't. Because they have really screwed up Hillsborough.
Thanks for that. I mean, we need to remember, when votes happen, it is the residents of the city. But to your point, what we're hearing through this process is a variety of voices, again, for you all to take into consideration. As Emily stated, these are members of the community, whether they're inside the city or not. But it's up to each of you individually for yourself and to share your comments with the group and think about how you want to take this information. We're just trying to give you as much information as we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, Larry Gonzalez. I agree with both people here. I guess my view as a business person in North Plains is that we don't exist in a vacuum. We need to appeal to all residents inside North Plains and plan and act accordingly. But we also need to listen to the folks that are the surrounding areas, because those are our customers, right? We got, okay, so if they don't want to drive through, a heavy commercial development over on the west side, then we need to go, okay, so, what would be more convenient for our customers? If the west side's getting overdeveloped with commercial, so we need to split it up so it's a little bit more even. Give us. I'm inviting the feedback because I want to know. Okay, so we're not just developing for the folks that are residents and of North Plains, but also the surrounding area, because they're the folks that are going to keep us running, right? They're going to come here and shop at our stores. They're going to come here and get their food, kids at the schools, all the stuff that we need as a city to be viable and to grow. Even if the urban growth boundary doesn't grow, we still need to plan for it. Folks have kids, right? And the kids want to live there, near their parents. What are they going to do? Go to Portland or someplace else? We have to be thinking about the folks that are here for sure, but also listen to the folks that are in the surrounding areas, so we know we're taking care of them too.
Thanks, Larry. Let's keep going. Should North Plains expand the urban growth boundary to include more commercial and industrial development? It looks like about 68% said do not, and 32% said yes, expand. And then of those, of the, I think 24 people who said yes, go to the next slide, please. We asked them how many acres they think should be included for commercial and industrial. I think about 25% said less than 100 acres, 20% said between 100 and 250, about 35% said from 250 to 500, and about 15% said the full 688 acres. Let's go to the next slide, please. This map is in your packets, but then I have 3 more that we didn't include this time. But we can probably include them next time. But what this map shows is, and it's a little hard to read, but for each of those areas that you see outlined in black, people who took the survey online could click and say, do I want residential, employment, or no development? The black numbers are the people who said no development. The yellow are the ones that said residential, and the blue are the ones that said employment. So you can see the black numbers to the west and the far north are much higher. There's a little bit of desire for employment on that inner west side. It looks like 9 for employment, 9 for nothing, 11 for employment, 9 for nothing. But a lot more people saying no development to the west. To the north, you have a high residential number directly adjacent to the city, and a little to the east, it's a little more balanced with residential or no development. It seems the further you get north from the city limits, the more people said no development. To the south, we had 17 for employment and 7 for no development. And then to the east, you see more of a mix. I mean, it kind of aligns with the urban growth boundary recommendation from 2023, where those ones to the northeast have 18 and 19 voting for residential. The area to the north, that's the northwest. To the northeast, you see a little bit more of a balance. I think 9 for each of those parcels for employment and 7 for residential, some for no development as well. And then to the south, you see kind of more employment interest as you get closer to the Jackson School Road interchange. And again, these are preliminary. We're going to keep this open through December. We want to continue to see what people have to say. Now I'm going to show one map for each. Let's go to the next one. So this is the residential map. The darker the color, the more people said residential in this place. So you can see to the west, there's a little bit of interest. Those reds though, and the orange, that's where people are most interested in seeing residential development. Next slide, please. For employment, you can see again, closer to Jackson School Road and those northeast parcels, there's really dark blue also to the south, not really much to the north. And to the west, you see some interest directly adjacent to the city, and then it grows lighter as you go further west. And next slide. And then the no development. You see a lot of those darker colors to the far north and to the west, and the lighter colors, fewer people saying no development directly adjacent to the city and to the south and to the east. Let's go back for a second. So is there any other, that's kind of a, you go, just go up. Yeah. Any questions about the information we've received so far? Larry, go ahead.
So you're saying the west side of the map is where people would do the strongest no development.
The west and the north. You can see that 10, that really dark one, that's in the north sub area. Eric, oh, go ahead.
Well, last question about the mapping. Has anybody either surveyed or asked the folks who are in north of North Avenue or in the Sunset Ridge area? Yeah, from voting stuff for a survey, what those folks, what they want to have around them.
I don't think that's specifically, I mean, not through this survey. We didn't ask people to, yeah, it's kind of hard. We can ask like zip codes and things like that. It's a little hard to find out exactly where people are coming from. I don't know if those conversations have been had separately at all.
All right, thank you.
Derek Lawson. I was on the project advisory committee in the first round. If you jump back one slide, Steve, for the commercial industrial development, I added some context. I was at the community meeting last week that I think added some value to our group. We ultimately did not go down that path of the actual exercise, but the Economic Development Commission and in the UGB PAC #1 discussions, we envisioned on that far west side developing for more industrial and commercial, but mostly the industrial focus, with the intent of being able to divert and mitigate any large trucks or industrial machinery coming through the city, and they'd be able to use the Dersham exit as an in and out. And so I think that helped just add that distinction, because it does kind of come off to people, especially from like a utility standpoint, being able to develop that land. But I know there is interest in different employers who would want to establish sites where they would, I think hypothetically, support in the costs to develop any type of utilities and running out there. So I know that far west gets forgotten in a lot of this, but I do want to make that distinction that in the original planning, that was the vision, is that would be kind of held for more heavier industrial development so that that Dersham exit would get utilized.
Thanks, Eric. Mitch?
Mitch Van Nolan, I noticed in a lot that you mentioned a few times and observed that the West was forgotten. I'm just wondering if there was any insights from anyone that attended the community meeting on why that those areas weren't heavily selected for any development areas.
Go ahead.
I'd say from my own table, it just didn't seem like an organic way to grow. Like, especially when we're looking at the branch out for the Sunset Ridge off of Jackson School, filling in that direction seemed to make more sense for utilities, but also like this is already where people are living. This is already where growth is occurring and the concentration is happening. And so if we were going to grow, it made more sense to fill that in versus going the opposite where there's not really anything and you end up with another like tendril sticking out of the city.
Actually, Emily, I was at your table.
Oh, that's right.
You did have,
We talked about it. We
you
leave
did
it
have
alone.
industrial on the west and you ripped it off.
But I wasn't the only
We
map.
didn't
There were
have
every single other map is in the
consensus
same
on
boat.
Yeah, I mean, part of
I
it
could go
might,
to every table and get everyone.
I'll just remind people that in terms of development readiness, it does go from east the most to north to west, but I think people, forgotten is a funny word, but people just didn't really talk about the west very much, at least in the report backs. I'm sure they did at their tables.
Yeah, well, that's, if every person filled in the urban growth boundary the exact same way, then the vote would have approved the urban growth boundary and we wouldn't be having this committee. So obviously people that voted in North Plains don't want it to look like the exact shape that it was going to be. And so if people are cutting, where do you cut and how does it make sense for people that want something smaller than what was presented before?
And also people,
Yeah,
We'll come to you next.
Yeah, this Tom Rock, just real quick, to kind of hit, at least from my point of view when I was looking at it, 'cause I read the reports that we had for the original UGB. And what the west side was reading like was data centers, chip manufacturing, which is kind of what the #1 priority was. And if we read a lot of the comments from a lot of the people, those are the #1 things that nobody wanted in the area, or any more chips or data centers. And when you read everything, the west side is what that was going to be geared towards, which is why a lot of people, I think, are just, it's not what's wanted in the community. That's what a lot of people don't want to see. So they're naturally going to say, we don't want to have anything to do with the west because we don't bring in 300, 400 acres, which is what you need for something like a Roller Acres. Then we don't have to worry about necessarily that being in our community if we keep it out. Not that they're, and the other side, I mean, we can still put some kind of industrial or something small in, but we're not going to be looking at any large scale chip or data center factories going in out there like it's going on off Hillsborough.
Thanks, Tom.
I think,
Name
I
again,
think
please.
a lot of the groups, I know Emily's group and my group and the other group, the reason we stayed with the east is one, we want to protect the city from Hillsborough. #1, that's the way to protect it. If they're across the highway, we need to set the boundary. That's why so many of us went after that section first.
Daniel?
So somewhere in our stuff, 96 and 97, there was a study by ODOT that looked at costs for looking at the areas around North Plains. The south was actually the most expensive because you had to cross, I don't know if the new overpasses changed that, but it was bringing the infrastructure across the freeway, which was going to be a major cost. The north expansion was fairly highly cost, and that's why we did everything and pointed it towards east. That was before Hillsborough was even moving down towards that boundary, but that study's got to still be here someplace, but it gave some really good indications of the percentage of cost for infrastructure. The overpass on Dersham, from ODOT standpoint, was to handle heavier traffic. which at that time, when we were looking at different areas for 50 years down the line, that was kind of set aside, that would be where the industrial would be because of the overpass bill. But now you have Jackson School overpass, which is a fairly structured deal, so it makes sense to keep it on that east side.
Thanks. Glenn, is there anything you want to say about the Dersham interchange?
It's not too much. I mean, obviously, that interchange would need with the kind of growth that would land in a place like that, you'd have a lot of upgrades probably required. Signalization, etc. Yeah, just a little. There's a cost to everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Larry.
Daniel, you're done, right? Larry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, he's good.
Totally off topic. Thank you. If the city decides to do nothing, it's basically, and just thinking about it and thinking about the area that we live in, Washington County, we're creating a growth factory that there's a demand for housing and all this stuff around, either in North Plains or in this area. And what do we know what the plan, if Hillsborough has a plan to address that vacuum by building up Jackson School Road and both sides of 26 and come right up to our door? Do we have that kind of information as far as what Hillsborough's plan is? Because again, I'm thinking about what we're doing here is if we don't do anything, we're creating a vacuum.
We'll actually touch on that. Okay. We don't have a lot of information, but we'll touch on it in just a moment. Okay.
I have kind of two parts. One of them has to do with that. First,
can you say your name first?
Joanna Farr. One, I wanted to get clarification. We've talked a lot about that the main focus of us being here is to kind of talk about and define the line. Within defining that line, is it also defining what areas of the line are for housing, what areas are for employment, and what areas are for? Is it defining that as well?
Great question. The ultimate recommendation that comes from the city is just a line. That's when the urban growth boundary expands, no new designations are applied right away. But we know that it's pretty hard to have a conversation about where to draw the line without at least doing some preliminary thinking about that. So I would call the land uses that we talk about here preliminary to help us draw the boundary.
And that's what I wanted to clarify, because I think everybody keeps going back to such a high focus as to, we don't want anything because this is going to happen there, this is going to happen there, and this is going to be built there, like if it was going to be built tomorrow. When I feel like we should really take a step back and really focus on what we want North Plains to really be. And this is not tomorrow or next year. This is probably like in 10, 20 years when probably none of us are going to be here because none of us have a guarantee of what's going to happen tomorrow, right? So how do we put that focus to the community and those voices that are from outside of North Plains that are giving this information that, Intel's going to come and build on the west side and Intel's going to do this, when all of that is such misinformation. And I think we're making decisions based on this hypothetical misinformation of what's coming, which really no one has a clue, And the next phase would be that as a community to get together as to then when a line is drawn, then what are we going to be? What are we going to build, where and what? Because growth is inevitable. And the reason why I'm here is because I'd rather have us decide grow North Plains and draw this line than our neighbors across, because we can't control what they do and what they don't. They have deeper pockets. And if we do nothing, growth is inevitable and others nearby are going to come and they're going to grow. And that's when none of us can go in there and say what we want and we don't want. So I just kind of want to redraw the focus to and clarify that where these lines are and stop putting so much focus on what's going to be built there, because we can't plan that right now. Right now is the line. So I just wanted to clarify that aspect of it.
Thank you for that perspective. That's really helpful. The idea of controlling your own destiny. Oh, Glenn. Did you have something?
Oh, I did. I put my hand down. I didn't want to take us down too far down a road. But someone asked, I couldn't see who, but someone asked about Hillsborough's plans around Jackson School Road. I'm forgetting the name of it, but that Meek Sewell, Wable Creek area has been, zoned industrial, and they are expecting growth that would impact that interchange. And you probably also know that that land south of 26, east of Jackson School Road is potentially coming into Hillsborough's urban growth boundary using the governor's supersiding authority. There you go. And
Yeah.
that would likely have transportation impacts. I don't know the details.
Thanks, Glenn. So we just wanted to give, because this question's been asked by a few folks, what are Hillsborough's plans? I can't speak very with a lot of certainty about this, and I don't know that anyone can, but this area that you see here to the south east corner of the Jackson School Road interchange was identified by Hillsborough and through the governor's citing authority under a Senate bill. I believe that a lot has to happen very quickly in order for this to be realized, and we have no idea if that's going to happen or not. But certainly you could say that there's some interest in that area from Hillsborough. So we just wanted to, because you all have asked about this, that's about as much as we know. I don't know, Steve, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, maybe just a couple things. One, if you really do want to get more information on this, I would encourage you to go to Hillsborough and speak with them, because this is really what they're championing. So it's their kind of desire here. And number two, in terms of Senate Bill 4 and what the governor is using to try and bring this land in with, a decision does have to be made by the end of the year if it will happen or not. If it does not, if a decision is not made by December 31st, it is our understanding that they lose that opportunity then to bring that in. So some decisions will have to be made very soon.
So we'll know more the next time we meet.
Yeah, in January we'll know what's going to happen with this 300 plus acres.
Terry Lenihan, and all I want to say about that blue area there, and certainly you can go out on the internet and Google it and do your own research. That area is known as the Grand Bargain area. And if you want to just understand what that area is and why that area is or was protected for 50 years, you can look up Grand Bargain and it'll probably take you to the Metro site and you can just read about it and educate yourself about it.
Thank you. The other thing we heard too is if it does come in, say it does come in by the end of the year, if it's not developed by 2029, it reverts back to being rural unincorporated lands. So there's a couple things in play there. And again, there's a lot of information that's missing because the state hasn't shared a lot recently. But those two things are written into the Senate bill in terms of the timing of having to make the decision, and then if the decision is made, how long it can stay vacant until it has to revert back. Those two things are in the language of the bills.
And please, if anyone from our state or county agencies have any additional information, feel free to raise your hand. You didn't have another question, did you? Okay, I just saw the name card.
Oh, sorry.
All right, so that was one piece of information we wanted to share. Steve, let's go to the next one. This is about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. We've mentioned a few times that rulemaking has been happening for the past year and is going to go on for another year around how communities in Oregon plan for future housing. Up until now, I've explained in the past, the city, like North Plains, gets a population forecast from Portland State University, and that's kind of the basis of figuring out, okay, based on this population forecast and income levels, how many units are needed, what type of units, and then how many acres is it going to take to accommodate that housing. Starting next year, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis process is changing how that's done. And because some people have talked about, we can repeal the H&A and then use this more recent lower population projection that came from Portland State University to forecast our housing. Well, that's not the way it's going to be done anymore. What's going to happen in the future is that the state and DLCD is going to give communities an allocation of housing. This is how many units at these different income levels North Plains needs to accommodate, or Hillsborough or Beaverton. Again, North Plains is not required to accommodate that housing due to its size. But if the city were to want to take another look at its housing forecast, it would be a different process. And I just wanted to make that clear. Did you have something to add, Steve?
No, I think what we're trying to say is there's impacts, to backing out of the current H&A that we have. So right now, under the H&A, if we use that one, we have a little more flexibility in the type of housing that we can bring into the city. If we get rid of that H&A and decide to go forward and then bring land in for housing in the future, we will be subject to the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis requirements. And that does control more of the type of housing that we're going to be required to bring into the city. There's going to be percentages, of this amount of affordable housing, this amount of multifamily, this much of middle housing, this much single family detached. And we're going to have to report all that. It all has to be reported on an annual basis back to the state on how we're meeting those goals and objectives. So there are implications for getting rid of the current H&A and going forward.
So I think suffice to say for now, it's going to be a different process. I don't think we can speak to many of the details right now, but it's going to be a different process. Daniel?
We don't have to meet those needs because we're smaller.
Correct.
So saying we have to do that chunk of this is irrelevant because we could pretty much do what we want to because we're smaller.
I think
Well,
Steve said
if
the city's interested in if the city were interested in residential growth, this would be the new system, but correct, the city does not have to.
So we're not required to vote all. As we were before, they made the change under periodic review. But again, if we did decide to grow in the future, then we would be subject to using this format.
Larry?
And I don't know how this works.
Let's keep saying our names.
Oh, Larry Gonzalez. If we went ahead with the urban growth boundary, but we didn't allocate any of the residential or commercial or any of that stuff, is there a time limit where we have to so we have to designate the areas, by the end of the year or in 2 years or 5 years or 15 years? Or can the city just sit on it and go, we're not ready, we'll let you know when we're ready. And then, but we've done the urban growth plan, we've got the line, but we just haven't allocated the pieces yet.
If the urban growth boundary is expanded, planning will happen. I don't know what, maybe Kevin Young could answer that question. Is there a time limit, Kevin, if you expand your urban growth boundary under which you need to identify what land use designations you're going to have? We know that the city has a grant from the state to do that planning. We also know that land in an urban growth boundary stays under county control until it's annexed, and that's when the city zoning designations come in. Anything to add there, Kevin?
I would just say, Kevin Young, Senior Urban Planner, DLCD, that there's a variety of ways that cities do this. Some will do sort of concept planning for their entire UGB area. Others will establish a holding zone. And before they bring lands into the UGB, they might require the applicant or they might work with the property owner to develop a plan that says, here's a portion of our identified land needs. Here's how we're going to put residential or employment needs or some combination or whatever. And you can do it that way incrementally, or you can kind of master plan it. But to answer your question, Steve, there's no time limit. What is absolutely required is before you annex lands into a city, you do need to address all applicable statewide planning goals. So that does require quite a bit of planning around, natural resources, hazards, housing needs, employment needs, transportation, infrastructure, all of that stuff.
Thank you, Kevin.
I can add a little bit to that. As he indicated, there's no timeline unless the urban growth boundary is identified and adopted. But it really is in the city's best interest to take a proactive approach on doing the concept planning to try and establish where the zoning districts are going to go, because that will help with the annexation process. So once you do that, we would adopt what's called an updated comprehensive plan map that would show that area that was in the urban growth boundary and how we would like to see the uses unfold into that area. And that would help guide folks who would like to come in and annex their land. They would know what our plans are anticipating, and we would update our plans accordingly. So the sewer transportation, the sewer, water, transportation plan, all those would be updated based upon how those zoning districts would be coming into the city based on the comprehensive plan. And so if somebody wanted to annex their land into the city based upon how we did all those plans, it would be pretty easy for them to just fall in line with what we did. If they didn't, if we did not do that concept planning to what the DLCD gentleman just said, that would be the burden upon the person annexing. They would be doing all of that legwork, you know, and trying to bring forward a comprehensive proposal to sit there and say that this land should be annexed because it can be accommodated through all these factors, you know. And so it gives us a little bit more control through the annexation process to do that concept planning right after we get the urban growth boundary identified. It just gives us a little bit more understanding of how it's going to come into the city.
Okay, before we go to Larry, just a moment, Kevin raised his hand.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with, was that Bill who was saying that? I mean,
Steve,
Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, okay, yeah. I think the best way to do it is to master plan the whole area and not do it piecemeal. That's my opinion. But I do think it is kind of, in terms of how planning works, that is it, in my opinion, the best way to do it. And if you can get some state funding to support that work, that's even better. There are other ways it can be done, however. That's all I was saying.
Thanks, Kevin. Larry?
And I guess my follow comment would be, so that really puts, I mean, if the city decides to go ahead with their urban boundary, it puts the city in control of the timing and the development and the annexation and when things happen. It doesn't have to be this year, it doesn't have to be in 5 years, it could be in 10 years, it could be in 15 years, right? The city's in control.
Property owners could initiate annexation themselves and do some of that work that Steve mentioned.
Right, but then they would be on the hook for the cost then.
Of the planning.
Yeah, and so again, any smart property owner would want to work with the city in the annexation process. So they're probably going to, you know, listen to the city and what the plan, you know, what's the master plan look like, all that kind of stuff to make sure that they're, you know, sharing the burden, et cetera. But I do want to emphasize that this process doesn't mean we have to develop today or tomorrow or in 5 years. It really puts the city in control of how fast we grow, where we grow, if we grow, all of those components, and up to, like, you know, the 20th year when we have to have the UGB requirements fulfilled, right?
Again, I just think it's important to note again that property owners play a really big part in determining, once the urban growth boundary is drawn, annexation is property owner driven. I also just want to point out that the county plays a big role in all of this as well, because again, they're still, I don't know what the right word is, in control of, or governing areas that are outside of city limits, but inside the urban growth boundary until they're annexed. And the city and the county working together, there's something called an urban growth management agreement where they determine how those things happen. That's a really important relationship as well.
Okay, so how accurate was what I just said? Kind of sort of accurate?
I mean,
to Steve's point, you know, all the land that we're looking at, right, to be considered come into the urban growth boundary is private property, right? We don't own any of that land. And so it is, to Steve's point, it's landowner driven, right? And I watched this happen when I was a planner at Bend, right? We had the same situation. And so what happens is, say I got land over here and there's land over here, and this is the land that's closest to the utilities. This guy's not going to go all the way over here and drag all those utilities over here to develop this land. He's going to wait. He's going to let it kind of come down to him, right? And so you'll have a pattern that will happen based upon where your existing infrastructure is. And it'll dictate, you know, the timing of how the lands are going to come in. And then the zoning will help people understand the type of uses that could come in to that area. It would provide some certainty, if you will. So if I'm a landowner, I'll say, oh, my land is zoned commercial. And so when that land annexed in, you can have an idea of what type of uses potentially could come in there. But again, they would probably wait until development got closer to them before they annexed in.
I'll say the city has a lot to say about where certain land uses are gonna go. The county and state agencies help with where transportation facilities are gonna grow. But the city doesn't have total control over the timing because annexation being property owner driven.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Bill?
The control we do have is city-owned infrastructure and how it gets paid for upfront. And then the development that when it wants to come in and annex, it has to match what our planning called for. And it also has to be able to pay the fees to help pay for financing all that infrastructure. So there's kind of this dynamic. So there's a lot of control with it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's move on to looking at some alternatives. Oh, sorry, Tom.
Tom, right. Well, a couple of comments and a question. So we touched on it a little bit here, there, and everybody here knows, you know, there's new city council coming in. Agenda sort of has been on the UGB and whether to do it or not do it. And if you read a lot of the comments, a lot of people are kind of against it still. And we've talked about that if we get rid of the H&A and we get rid of the requirement for the city to do it, which let's say that happens and we don't do it. And 6 months later, 3 months later, everybody looks at everything and goes, oh, we messed up. Maybe we do need to do the UGB. We have to go through this whole process again. Is that going to incur a large expense in the city? And the second part of that kind of question is, we're doing a whole new way to plan for housing. And just the way I read it, it's a very good possibility going this way that are, let's say right now we're at 100 acres or whatever for housing. Based on the affordability on the surrounding areas and like how much we pay for property taxes and stuff, is it a real possibility that our 100 acres can turn into 200 or 300 acres of housing that they may say we need just because we have lower property taxes and it's more affordable to live out here?
So the first question was about planning. And yes, the city would have to start over because the current economic opportunities analysis and housing needs analysis would need to be redone. Those are year-long processes that probably cost each about $50,000 or so, I would say, not including, housing, not including staff time and resources. That's like a consultant estimate. Then you'd have to do the urban growth boundary expansion analysis over again, and that's another year, probably another $50,000 to $100,000. I'm not speaking with, so you're talking about 2-3 years and several $100,000 probably for that process. And then the second question about what could happen with the numbers, I don't feel equipped to answer that question, Steve, or.
Well, I think that's a bit of an unknown. But again, you know, in terms of cost, there's a little bit of an unknown because of ONA, right? Because we're not going to go and use the Portland State numbers anymore. We're going to be given an allocation. But, you know, part of that housing needs analysis helps identify where some of these housing developments should go, right? It's not just saying, you know, what is the need? It's also looking at where we can put it. And so I'm a little uncertain on that, Steve, in terms of with the ONA, like all the details that go into housing needs analysis. Where does some of that information come from? Is it all going to come from the state? Or do we have to go and supply some of that? Are they just going to give us a number and then we have to do a little bit more work? Some of that is still being determined. They're still working on some of the rules for some of this. The cost can go up or down.
It takes a little bit, like we were saying, it's out of our hands at that point. We can be given something that we don't want. We don't have the North Plains that have control of how many houses and where and what type. It's kind of dictated that we do it at that point. What we would have.
Kevin, would you say it's fair to say that there's a little bit less local control over the future H&A process because of the allocations being given by the state?
Think so. I'm sorry. I can't, I having a hard time hearing everything that's being said. And
Okay.
I have to say, I'm not an expert in the ONA. I believe the PSU numbers, PSU will still be doing population projection numbers and providing population estimates. What the ONA will do is it will distribute, kind of take a more regional view of where housing needs to go. And those numbers will provide targets. Like we have a target for this many units over the next, planning period. And it will set like different income levels. Local governments will have, discretion as to like where and what types of housing are going to meet those income categories. And we also understand that much of this is subject to public subsidy because we know you can't build affordable, under market housing and expect the market to produce it. So, all of that is sort of the concept. It will be different, I think. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about the translation of the population estimate, the piece that the ONA, I know certainly will add is kind of a closer look at like providing a variety of housing types that meet people at different affordability levels, because we're just not really doing a good job of that statewide. And housing costs are getting pretty crazy. So anyway, that's what I can tell you today. But yeah, the rules are still in progress, and we are not sure where everything's going to land.
Thank you, Kevin. Daniel, and then we'll move on to the alternatives.
I have a question and just kind of a statement. Can you go back to that one with the Hillsborough? Oh, we call it Grand Banks.
Grand Bargain.
The one thing that sticks out on this really heavily for me is that little loop at the very top left side of that, which goes across the freeway to grab both interchanges. And Hillsborough's under the same deal we are. They have to take exception land before they take other things. That's a connection to that exception land that's on the east side. If you don't think Hillsborough will do a land grab for that chunk of land, I mean, we're at the point, Hillsborough's gonna be right there where our city limits ends. There's a reason they've gone across that freeway, and it's because that's probably gas stations, something in that interchange they're wanting to loop over for. And that connects to that exception land. And once that connection's made, Hillsborough, I have no doubt in my mind the way they've played the game here for the last 50 years, they will grab that exception land because they have to.
Glenn,
And we have no control over what's on our east side.
Glenn, can you speak at all to how that interchange is included in that graphic? Do you know anything about the details there?
Yeah, so this is Glenn Boland from ODOT. As Kevin mentioned, it's a little bit hard to hear, but so you're asking the Jackson School Road interchange?
Yeah, how it's included in that shape there?
So why is it included? The presumption here, my understanding is that because that land is will be inside the metro urban growth boundary. We had, I think, previously part of the freeway in, part of the freeway out, as it currently stands. So this basically would have the interchange inside the urban growth boundary. So it's a part of the metro region for, multiple, federal fund allocation for transportation planning rule purposes, whatever's, going to be. So, yeah, I don't, it is purposeful that the interchange itself is included, but really it's got to do with governance and funding and Metro. Metro didn't ask for it or anything, but I'm saying is being within Metro, because Metro controls the UGB. They do the federal government has MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, perform the congestion management process, which is actually the planning for freeways and highways for regions. And then they have, agencies like TriMet and ODOT and cities, counties do the implementation. So this puts that under their purview for planning.
Thank you, Glenn. All right, so now we're gonna share what we think the alternatives might be to share with the community on January 9th, and we're gonna wanna hear back from you on, are these the right alternatives, or are there any others that we should add? Let's go to the next slide. So this is the September 2023 UGB expansion. This could be on one far end, something that people look at. Next slide. So here's something new. We said, well, what if we have an alternative that just takes that western area out completely? That could be a second alternative. I'm gonna pause here. One thing I should have mentioned. The idea at this open house, we'll talk a little bit more about the end, is not that people necessarily come in and say, I want 1, 2, 3, or 4, but rather we want to hear what you like and what you don't like about 1, 2, 3, and 4, because it's very possible that in the end, we have an alternative that is not any of those 4, but rather a hybrid of them. So I just wanted to mention that. So here's an alternative. We thought, take out the western area, keep the north, south, and east. Next slide, please. So here's another alternative. We saw that some maps had residential in the north, some did not. So another alternative could be, well, let's just expand to the south and to the east. Next slide, please. And then finally, a no growth option. I will say we could choose to include land uses or not include land uses. Can you go back a slide? The ones that we showed here are showing the yellow and blue to give those preliminary ideas of land uses, but to Hannah's point earlier, like that's not what the UGB would be. It would be a line, not those land uses. So we could just draw lines if we wanted to go that route, but these are the 4 alternatives that we thought of, kind of going from no growth all the way up to the September proposal, but having these 2 in between, this one with no growth to the north or to the west, and then this other one with just no growth to the west. So this is up for your discussion at this point. Gary.
Yeah, Gary Lopez, quick question for you. When you define we, can you explain for the group who we are when these alternates were created?
Yeah, so we looked, we meaning 3J, in consultation with city staff, I think I mentioned that earlier, took a look at the results of the online map and the community meeting and said, okay, let's come up with a couple other alternatives for the RAC to discuss. Rather than come in here and say, all right, folks, come up with some alternatives. I think it's easier for you to have some things to react to. So we're not saying that those 2 other alternatives necessarily have to be what we show to the community, but we wanted to give you something to react to and think about. Tom.
Tom Brown. So, correct me if I'm wrong, if we keep the current HNA, doing UGB, we have to incorporate enough land to cover that entire HNA.
Correct.
So if we go back to our acreage in our slides, so I remember what the number was.
Yep, it's 127 acres of housing and 40 acres of parks.
So what does this show for housing?
So this would assume that this is less than those 127 acres. This would assume that the city decides to repeal the HNA and go through a new process to identify the housing need. Will it end up with that many? We don't know, but to me, that's a clear message from folks. And we talked about this a bit at the community meeting, that if people, because we originally asked people at the meeting, either show all the residential or none, because that's kind of the choice, repeal or keep the HNA. And there was some pushback saying, well, we want to show less because we think if we repeal, then we can do a new HNA and show that we have a lower need because of the lower population forecast. So essentially, the way I would take this and took those maps is people who show less than the full amount of residential are telling the city, you should repeal that HNA and start that process over.
So so if we're displaying these, would we have a caption on them describing, like the first one, like if we back up one more, that's the one that has enough acres to accommodate the current HNA.
Correct.
So that would be the caption, current HNA.
That sounds good.
And then the next slide where we say, we redo the H and A, this is a possibility, but we have no idea what the numbers are gonna look like.
Thank you.
It still looked like the other slide.
That's really helpful to think about. We would definitely have some narrative description, some bullets describing each of these alternatives. I think I hadn't thought that far ahead, but definitely we should do that. Again, another option would be to not show the land uses at all, or maybe to have one map that just shows the line and another one that shows these preliminary land uses. Open to suggestions on that. Larry?
Larry Gonzalez, to come off of Tom's question. With the current H and A, is it required that we meet all of the needs?
Yes.
Okay, so the next thing, again, following Tom's comment, is if we do this, we'll have to do a new H and A.
Correct.
But and again.
But the amount of housing
Yeah.
land need is uncertain.
Yes, so it could be the same, it could be different. So now we're
Correct.
paying for the same, well, basically the same result twice. Right? I mean, we could.
I don't know. You could, sure.
And so the last thing, I mean, in terms of alternatives would be, there's no wiggle room as we are existing right now with the UGB in front of us as an option. There's no special request for, different allocation or nothing. Now we're locked in.
No, that's kind of the discussion we had at the community meeting. Again, I said you should put all or none.
Right.
There was some pushback, because I said the decision that faces the city right now is to keep the current HNA and allocate all of those acres, or repeal it and do none.
Right.
Yes, the city could then do another study and get a new number. We don't know what that number is going to be.
But again, we would not be doing another study. We would be getting the numbers from the state. And they have done a preliminary allocation of units for all the cities in Oregon.
Well, that's right.
And we're at about 712 on the HNA, on the ONA process. So it's not a big difference between what the current HNA is showing and what has come out of the state right now in their numbers for the ONA.
But those aren't final.
No, I'm
And
just saying
cities still are
preliminary.
gonna play a role in the process. I don't think we want to say that it's just the state. There's still a role for the city, as Kevin mentioned earlier. There's just more information that the state is giving versus just that population forecast. Daniel?
I must be getting confused, because my understanding is we don't have to, because we are small enough that we don't have to do that. We can make that all commercial if we want to. True?
If the HNA was repealed.
The
Which,
city,
yeah, but I mean, we could, we don't have to do a whole nother housing analysis. We're small enough, we could say that's all commercial.
you could say that, but you can't choose a smaller number of residential acres, either because of the HNA, and the HNA said 127 acres of housing. Either the city keeps that HNA and does 127 acres, or repeals the HNA and does zero.
Zero housing.
Correct.
Right, and then so we could make it all commercial at that point. We just repeal the one, we could do whatever we want to there, pretty much.
But not housing.
But not from a housing perspective.
If we do another HNA then, at a certain time later. But to
That
put
is-
the line out there, we don't have to plan that right now. We just need
Well-
to get a line on a map
well,
that keeps Hillsborough from
The
taking.
city would, instead of a urban growth boundary expansion of 800, well, however many acres, you would subtract out, you can't expand the 127 for housing, that comes out. You no longer have that land need if you repeal the HNA. And you no longer have the 40 acres of park and open space, because that's part of that as well.
So we have to keep the 127 regardless of what we bring in.
No.
If I might, no, I know, it's, the city can repeal the current HNA, and then until it becomes 10,000 or more population, not touch housing as an issue regarding expansion. And then with the current EOA that the city has, employment land, it could make all that, they can make, there's enough acreage in employment land need to make everything on the east side blue.
Yeah.
Basically, okay. But what I want to say about that though is if you eliminate housing expansion. Then you're planning businesses going right up to near the environmentally sensitive areas of McKay Creek. And you aren't planning for parks and trails because you're doing nothing but employment.
I'm just talking about getting the UGB. We don't have to have that broke out into what goes where.
But if you don't have housing as part of it with park space in it, then your plan, even if you draw the line and you say it's all gonna be blue, it's all gonna be employment. If housing and parks and open space isn't part of that because you repealed it.
Right.
You're planning business parks and you're not planning trails, you're not.
We're trying to draw a UGB line. In other words, put a line someplace. We can put the line there without having all the breakout, or we have to have how many acres and then draw the UGB.
But if you repeal the housing and public space part, you can expand, you can draw your line, but then when you plan it, concept plan it, no parks, no trails. Employment land need is purely employment land need. And if you draw the line only for employment land, yeah, that makes
You
sense.
gotta kind of say, I need land, and I need this much land so I can do these things. And how you move boxes around is the difference.
As long as you have all.
Just to help a little.
I'm really concerned on what I would like to get a UGB line.
I would just add, you know, in that scenario, to what Bill and Steve both said, Steve Miller, planning manager, the city, when we were looking at those previous maps that other folks had did during the community meeting, and you saw down there were large gaps between the residential and the employment down there. That's a boundary that we would not be able to really accommodate because it's not all contiguous, right? And so to Bill's point, if we were to get rid of the H&A and say we were just gonna do an economic lands growth, the land here that's in yellow, this would start to become economic lands. And so we can move this line around that area. And so it would become an impact on the Sunset Ridge folks if we did just an economic lands in the east side. Because we would be starting right at this boundary right here. This is the current city limits right here. Trying to expand that just for economic lands, we would be drawing it down this way, right? So we're gonna start putting those economic lands next to Sunset Ridge. We don't really think that would be the best option for putting commercial right next to Sunset Ridge in terms of, you know, big intense uses.
Emily?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was gonna just say, because it's helps me to think about it, this is Emily Waldron, as like everything's one big packet. So the housing needs analysis has been put forward, but correct me if I'm wrong, like it technically isn't approved because we don't have the urban growth boundary to go with it. So all of these have to be in the same package together or it's in trouble. And I think just something I'd like to keep in mind when we're trying to figure out, because I think it is important actually to look at allocation of what goes where and what we're gonna do, is like what happens to be there? Like Sunset Ridge, there's a school there that all these kids are going to, you know, it'd be nice not to have the kids butt right up to some commercial development or, you know, no one wants to look outside their house and just see the giant wall of a warehouse next door to them. So just having this thought of these are our neighbors and what would they want as their next door neighbor, or if my kids are going to that school, what do I want next to my kid's school to be deciding how we're moving this around?
I'd like to talk like specific feedback if we go to the first map.
Okay.
To me, this is one more to the right, yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of alternatives, this to me is a decent compromise. The feedback we've gotten is we should grow smartly. And up until this point, I don't think anyone can decide definitively what that means. And to me, this map is at the very least a compromise between the two of growing smartly in terms of keeping the housing needs analysis in place and being able to grow and accommodate a connected city. And so I'd just like to get feedback from this group if there's anyone that has issues with this map specifically, what the feedback would be, just out of my own curiosity, what some of the drawbacks would be, et cetera.
Thanks, Eric. And I'll just say, if I may amend your question.
Yeah.
In terms of having this be something, one of the alternatives we share with the public, not how people personally necessarily would feel about it up or down.
Yeah.
Is this something that one of the alternatives we want the public to weigh in on? Emily?
Wait, I'd say yes to that, but with this, I have the question of how are we going to get a lot of the public present? I know we have the January 9th meeting. Is that the only meeting? Or like, is it wild to say, like, what if we took a Saturday morning and had like a weekend time? That might be more conducive to people with children and families to come through, or like, how are we getting the bodies to look at this and see this and lay eyes on it and get word out there?
Yeah,
So we get better turnout than just 100 people or 200 people.
I'll say briefly, I would be thrilled with 100 or 200 people. We have this later, but I'll just say briefly, our thought was, and we haven't talked about a weekend, that's certainly something that could be done, but more of an open house style format that would be open for a longer period of time, potentially like from 4 to 7, where people can come in, give their opinions and go, as opposed to like the last meeting where, or the last 2 meetings where you're kind of there for the whole thing. So at least that's what we were thinking about for the format. Tom?
We were talking about, getting everything out there and showing all of them. I know before, is it beneficial and something we have to come up with as a group, to have a pros and cons to each one of these situations? I'm a retired naval officer. I worked on straight from staffs, and when we did all this stuff in the background, when it came time to go brief the boss, it was COA 1, and these are the pros and cons of what it is. And that way, it's all out there for nobody to guess, like we already thought through, like, this is, if we keep the H&A, and these are the pros of what it'll give everybody for parks and housing and economics. And these are the cons for it, whatever we come up with. It's possible maybe there's no real cons in the area. So wait for the next one, and what are the pros and cons of it? That way we can display it and show it. It gives the bottom lines of why we would choose those options and what we would be looking at.
My only thought would be, I mean, if this group can come up with those, that could be reasonable. I like what we said earlier about describing them, because what might be a pro for you might not be for someone else. So I like the idea of giving a full description. This includes this many acres of parks, this many acres of residential, other kind of considerations without putting a judgment on them. But yeah. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm David Amon. Yeah. So how many alternatives are we looking at?
So
are we being asked to review?
It's up to you all. We've thrown out 4, ranging from no growth to the just to the east and the south, to the everything except the west. You're not keeping up with me, Steve.
I know.
To
Behind from the start.
To the original one. So we proposed 4, but you could do more or you could do less. I wouldn't want to do too many more. That's going to be hard for people to 4, 5, 3 to 5, somewhere in there. It feels like the right number.
Yeah, I agree. 3 or 4 should be good. And then to add that to what the last speaker said, if we can summarize the pros and cons of each of the alternatives. So this is alternative 1. Here are the pros and cons. Alternative 2, pros and cons. And then I think it will inform us in making happiness advise the council.
Thank you. Again, I would just think hard about the pros and cons versus just a description, because like I said, what might be a pro, this group would have to all agree on what those pros and cons are, and that might be difficult. Emily?
Would it work to flip it? So like we had the image and we tell people like, this includes this much land, this much housing, or this would involve a repeal of the housing needs analysis, this wouldn't, and then individuals can give us their own pros and cons of each one.
I mean, that's what we're gonna be asking for,
That's what I was like,
exactly.
I'm just thinking like, are we gonna have like the form and they're filling it out and then they're going?
Yeah, what we typically do is we'll have kind of stations for the however many alternatives, 1 for each alternative. There'll be a big flip chart that people can write. Maybe it'll be split down the middle. Here's what I like about this one. Here's what I don't like about this one. And then they'll also have, if they'd rather just write on a comment form, they can do it that way. And then we'll also have another online survey for people who can't make it whenever the open house is being conducted. Daniel?
So I know in the past, long time ago, we had maps, right? And 3 of them, I think, in here at one time, people put a sticker on and they kept the place open all weekend or all day on a weekend day. And we actually got a pretty good turnout. It said 100 to begin with, it was well more than that. And they stuck their sticker on what they wanted. It was a description of stuff. And it was something to look at as far as which one was the most popular. You know, I mean, thing that I would believe we would need to do is really figure out who that audience is that gets to put stickers on. Like I said, people affected by this are gonna be those people that live in those areas. I would say that would be a priority. I'm not into the 97133 people because that's 7 miles away.
Yeah.
So,
Helvetia's not 97133, just FYI. So those were different than that. And I'd like to include like, because it's in school, we have school families.
yeah, I mean, people that, like the school could be that area. I'm fine with that. But they maybe have a different colored sticker and see what the residents versus people that are outside of the voting aspect of it.
Terry?
Terry Lenahan. So, all right, it's gonna be a little wonky, but, there's conversation, and there has been conversation in the community that the incoming council wants to just annihilate this group, just like get rid of it and start all over, okay? And I think these conversations that we're having and the feedback has been, it's really good, it's healthy, right? Is there a way for this group to sort of show solidarity to the new council to say, listen, we're having some really great conversations and we really want this to keep going. And January doesn't have to be the hard stop. That's not the hard stop. Like we can keep this going and keep this conversation going, right? Because I don't see any new counselor in the room. 2, I don't know if any new counselors online hearing counselor-elects hearing these conversations, and maybe they will watch it later on, which is great, right? But there's some really good questions that this group is coming up with. And I guess I would just ask, is there just a way for this body to stand in solidarity and say, listen, we want to keep talking about it, and we want this group to keep going forward?
I'm looking your way, Bill.
That's a big ask, but I think it's important to ask the question.
I don't have to tell you, Mayor, it is an ad hoc committee that's been set up to answer a question. What is a smart, new, grow EGP expansion? What should it look like in response to the May election? I don't see anything wrong with that. It's communication and I don't see what there's a problem.
I guess it would be the will of the group to do
Yeah, the
that,
group.
right? Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
Mr. Chairman, in relation to the question from Mayor Terry, the remarks from Mayor Terry, I wanted to ask, has there been any deliberate effort to rope the incoming, council into this discussion? Since personally, to me, the UGB is more of a strategic, long-term vision for the town. Have we tried, or have we made any effort to rope them into this discussion so that at the end of the day, we may not find ourselves in a situation where they come in and end up disagreeing with all the hard work that is there.
They've been participating they participated in the community meetings. I don't know that I can't see who all's on, so I think there's been some attendance of these meetings, the community meetings, and I know for a fact we've had 1 or 2 of them show up at community meetings, the workshops that we've had. I mean, yes and no. I mean, have we said, hey, new city councilors and new mayor, we haven't put a gesture out there. Because it's kind of weird because they're already members of the community and they're very aware of the issue, and some of them have been participating at different levels in this. I mean, one thing this body could do, say, is kind of, ask the newly elected city council or city council members to come and talk to you, or, have a conversation with them. I don't think there'd be anything wrong with that. But I do know that some of them have been participating in different points, so.
I go Rudy and then Gary.
Growth is inevitable, and to be so naive to think that no growth is an option, it just isn't. This city, without any additional commercial growth, industrial growth, is going to have to rely on taxes from residential, which is relying on now. So what will happen is either the city will go bankrupt, or the taxes will become so high on the residents that live here that no one will want to live here anymore. If we don't establish a boundary, then Hillsborough will grow into the areas that we otherwise would have. We have an opportunity, and we said it 20 years ago, to establish a much bigger plan. I mean, what we're talking about here, whether it's a little bit on the east, a little bit on the north, a little bit on the west, it's like taking pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and putting them in place, but not having all the rest of the pieces together. Ultimately, we talked about a 100-year growth plan that takes in physical boundaries like Highway 26, and like Jackson School Road and Dersham Road and Pumpkin Ridge Golf Course on the north, and create a long-term vision for what the community look like, where housing wants to be, where jobs want to be, where parks want to be. And so that each future UGB expansion fits into that ultimate picture. So I'm really concerned with those folks who have stated no growth, because that's a death knell for the city. It'll just become, a suburb of Hillsborough, or a neighborhood of Hillsborough ultimately, because they're aggressive. Believe me, they'll cross the freeway and take our land to the east and to the west ultimately. And we just won't have the distinction of having North Plains. Old term at North Plains that is north of the freeway. Adding a South Plains, we've talked about that in the past, and again, it's creating a city that's divided by, a freeway. I've experienced that in Wilsonville. And the problem with Wilsonville now is that the two interchanges they have are so crowded, because that's not because people are using them to get on and off the freeway, which ODOT is intended to do. But they're going across from the east side to the west side, because the junior high is on one side and the high school's on the other side. There's elementary school on one side. There's shopping on one side and not shopping on the other side. There's industrial on the north and there's residential on the south. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't master planned. And ultimately, what we need is a 100-year master plan, because I'm telling you, 20 years from now, or 40 years from now, or 60 years from now, the people sitting around this table without a long-term guidance and without pieces to the puzzle will be questioning and arguing and ultimately be frustrated by the fact that we don't have housing near the schools, we don't have jobs near the freeway, we don't have decent retail, we don't have decent shopping. Or the city just goes away and becomes part of Hillsborough. So again, I'd argue that we ought to be thinking long-term about that whole, is that red? I'm red, green color blind. The whole
Green.
There's a green line.
The green line. Ultimately, the green line ought to be something that we look at long-term as how that gets planned. And then each expansion, and we're talking about this expansion, we figure out where's the best way to go, where's the next growth should be taken. There's all the other considerations of what are the current needs for jobs and housing, what is the most affordable way to grow that with the existing infrastructure. not to mention the infill with the existing city. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Rudy, and we'll go to Gary. I will note that the committee that put forth the current recommendation to council, they did take a larger look at the whole area and then say, okay, what should the whole area look like in 50 or 100 years? And now what should this UGB expansion look like? Gary?
Steve, I think I want to be courteous of everybody's time. I know that people need to comment, so I'm gonna make it real brief. I've been quiet during these meetings. I was an opponent of this urban growth down. A group of folks knocked on my door and asked me what I thought. And the term smart growth was used, and that's what got me on board. I was encouraged to join this board to do that, in fact. And I'm gonna be out and open, and when I say this, is that I am included in correspondence from a certain group in this town. I shouldn't even say in this town, from outside city limits, that has nothing good to say about this board or the current city council. And I think it's very important that we as a group, to Terry's point, stand united, get in front of those folks and voice our opinion. And that's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Other thoughts or comments? I'm gonna direct us back to the 4 alternatives that are proposed, and I'm not hearing any, is there another alternative that we should be showing? Should we not be showing some of these alternatives? That's what we kind of want to get to in the next 10 minutes or so, if we can. We gave you a starting point. Tom, go.
Couple things. One, I think we should limit to 3. It should be 3 alternatives, no H&A without the western side, and then basically the last 3 slides.
Don't do the original one?
Yeah, I don't know if we want to show them the original one. I mean, it's an
Okay.
option. Other thing I will say is addressing a lot of it, that I think everybody in this room is on the same page with this process, that we're all for some sort of growth and expansion. So trying to convince ourselves of something is kind of wasting our time. I think what we do need to do is put forth something to the new council, to the rest of the city on where this goes. I believe that the city council meeting is before our next meeting. So whoever is our duly represented, leader of the charge, which I think is Steve, they should maybe make some sort of comment during the public comments at the city council that we're doing great work, and a brief synopsis of what we're doing to get it out in front of them, and invite all the council members and everybody to the next meeting on the 9th. And that way we'll get them in the room and we can keep it out there in the public, and we can decide on how to disseminate what we want to do from there.
And Tom, this is Terry. I just want to say, maybe not Steve, not staff. I think it should be residents, people, Gary, Larry, I think it should be Joanna, or maybe we all show up, right? I mean, and we can all show up in solidarity and maybe pick 1 or 2 people to speak, but I think it would be best coming
I didn't mean
from.
that, Steve, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Not
don't think
that I
that's a
don't want you
good
to
rule
speak,
for me.
Steve.
Go ahead.
Bill can speak.
Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll go down to Jacqueline.
Yeah, no, what I was gonna say was, you're an ad hoc committee for the city. You can ask for a work session at the new city council's earliest convenience, get an hour before a regular business meeting and talk. You can do that. So I guess what I would say is, I think it's probably appropriate that one of you step forward, you vote on somebody, pick someone to kind of be the name to just kind of send a request to city council to come and talk and bring current findings and where you are and give an update, call it a work session. You can do that. You're an official ad hoc committee of the city. You're not just a community gathering. So you have that ability. It's just a matter of who's your voice, and how and when would you like to communicate interest in that meeting?
If there was a work session too, that's something I could support you in and present some of what we've presented, but as Bill said, it should come from this group. Jacqueline.
Jacqueline, I think when we're talking about options and presenting them, we have to understand human behavior and the reason that popcorn sales are what they are at the movies. And if you give people certain choices, no growth being one and something that looks like big growth, they will pick the middle choice. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about the choices that we're making and the implications of that. And so if we want the garlic festival to move, then that needs to be part of the planning. I also wonder if we've listened about the amount of blue that people are objecting to. So on the Economic Council, we want to see more. And I want to make sure that we present an option that meets a balance need and is responsive to it.
What might that look like? Can you go to up to?
I'm sorry, well,
So how would what you're saying be different maybe than this one?
Can you speak to, again, the requirement for across the road growth?
That area,
Across the freeway?
yeah,
Is that non-elective?
that is the first, according to the state planning system, that is the first land to come into the urban growth boundary because it's not farmland, whereas everything else is farmland.
But it doesn't have to be. I mean, I could really get behind this if we didn't go south of the freeway.
So if I might, it's the first land that we have to consider for bringing into the urban growth boundary. It is not the first land we have to annex and develop and then move on. The city would have to figure out how expensive infrastructure would be extended south of the freeway, and then paying for that infrastructure by so little development relatively. That's not an easy equation.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
We're selling to Hillsborough.
Daniel has this. Well, before we go to Daniel, Jacqueline, is there a different alternative that you would propose?
I'd like to have the group think through how the proposals. So I heard, let's do no growth and the other two, and I think you've sealed your fate if you do that. So I would challenge us to think about another strategy of presenting than that.
Okay, well, we'll go on. I will just mention that, again, we won't be asking people to vote on 1 or 2 or 3. We're gonna be asking people, what do you like about each option and what you don't like about each option, in part because of what you're pointing out. If we ask people to vote, there are biases implicit in how you design that exercise, and that's why we don't ask for just a vote. If people want to tell us, I really like this one, that's fine. But what we'll be asking people is, what do you like about each alternative and what do you not like about each alternative?
I just want to go back to that map of the Great Banks. People have to look at that, realize what's going on here.
Oh, yeah.
They are across the highway, and that is touching exceptional land. Once they touch it, they have to take it. They don't have to, but they will. Hillsborough has been aggressive for 50, 60 years. And they will gobble up a small town and do what the hell they want.
Yep.
Thank you, Daniel. We've heard that. Before we go to Larry, go.
So as far as the cost and benefits go, or what are the implications of each of the scenarios? I think one thing that's not being said about the no growth scenario is that necessarily means the city's density and building heights go up with growth, because if you don't move the urban growth boundary and you don't grow out, but you still see people coming here and it's infill and redevelopment and those sorts of things, that's greater density. And that's also increasing building heights to get some growth into the same amount of land. Now, some people view that as great. We would love to see taller buildings and this, that, or the other. But I think you can objectively say, with no urban growth boundary expansion, but growth of some kind being inevitable, you are looking at densification and you're looking at building heights doing this. And I think that needs, from my perspective, that needs to be talked about because that has different infrastructure implications too. You know, more traffic in the same amount of, with the same amount of roads. When do we get transit? You know, with more people in the same area, you know, those things. So those are, you know, it's a city building thing. But I think if you wanna bring forward a no growth scenario, I think it needs to be compared to the other scenarios in some way, and density and building height is one of them. I mean, that's just what it is.
Can we go to Larry and then I'm gonna take us through an activity here.
Okay, in a previous iteration, I went to the same thing with another city. And we had consultants basically kind of map out, you know, what do we want our city to look like? If you went from one end of town to the other end of town, what do we want to see? Like, what do we want to see around us? Is there a anchor that have commercial anchor at one end of commercial, and the other end of West Union and Jackson, right? You know, really kind of envision what you want the city to look like. You go down commercial and go down West Union to Jackson School. What do you want? You know, what do you want to see both sides? What do you want the folks visiting or thinking about moving to North Plains to see? You know, going up and down Glencoe and, you know, getting a feel for what's, you know, what's missing. What do we want? What do we want in our town? What do we want people to see here? You know, what's the draw? Why would somebody want to live here? And because all these things on the map look great, but unless you can envision what it's going to be like to walk down that street, right? Drive through town, see something that's going to be impactful to you and your family, and see that, you know, North Plains is a place to be. You know, how can we make it better?
Yeah. Coming into our next meeting, we're gonna have a lot more information, including what people said about North Plains becoming a more complete community. And I think that's where we're gonna have all this community input and we can engage in exactly the conversation that Rudy and Larry are talking about. But for tonight, we're talking about this upcoming meeting where we're gonna try to gather a little bit more information for you all. So since we're at about time, what I'd like to do is just go around to each person and hear from you. So we proposed 4 alternatives. Do you like those 4? Do you want 3? Is there one that's missing? And try to kind of get a clear path towards that next meeting. So I'm gonna start with Mitch.
Would you like me to scroll through all 4?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. So, whoops, from the top here, that's the September 23rd. Proposed alternative number 1, number 2, and number 3.
And number 3 is nothing.
It's no growth.
Yeah. I mean, I like 1 and 2. I think 3 is I mean, to offer it as an option makes sense, but I mean, 3.
I'm sorry, say again?
Well, you're asking how many options.
I'm saying, what alternatives do you think we should ask the public to weigh in on?
I think you asked them to weigh on all 3.
Okay.
Or 4, were there 4?
Well, there's the original.
Yeah, I think that one, right.
You think that was done? Okay, I'm hearing 3.
Okay.
I like having all 4 of them just to show that we listened. To be like, you guys really said, as a public, you didn't like map, the original map. Here's how we've taken it back as a reminder to people.
So they can see.
So they can see that we've heard what was said and we're trying to listen and come up with something that's more agreeable towards everyone.
We could also just have that as a reference map, like, hey, just to remind you, here's what was voted down. Next, Joanna.
I do agree in having the first one as a reminder to show that, you know, we listened. I like, is this the first one?
This is, yeah, we'll renumber them, but yeah, this is
Like the
one.
first one. And then also in regards to the no growth, I don't know if having that has been as an option. The reason why I say that is those that are just not attending meetings, just focus on misinformation, or those that have higher voices that don't even live here, but it's just no growth, no growth. Based on family that I had, that was on the last community one, they sat with people that were very adamant, no, we shouldn't even, they were very against drawing anything on the map. But my family member had to explain what we talked about here today. Look, if this doesn't happen, this is what can happen on the east, and if this doesn't happen, then no growth is not helpful a lot. And literally, when my family member explained that to them, these two people, the spouse was even getting angry with the other spouse saying, we came here to be adamant about no. Why are you now changing your mind? The husband had to go to her and be, well, it makes sense. Like, we're saying no growth, but we don't want another city to come and take it, because a lot of people are not seeing that. So how do we also portray that information of, because some people are no growth because they just want things to stay the same, but they're very naive of what the repercussions will be of no growth. So how can we explain to the people that are adamant of no growth, that think everything's gonna be beautiful and dandy and the same with no growth, but how do we explain what those repercussions can be, so people that are voting no without that knowledge can have that knowledge and understanding? So I don't know if we could showcase that in some way, or show that I don't know how it can be, but I'm just speaking to that behalf based on that example.
Yeah, we have a no growth with just red Hillsborough all around.
I want to Photoshop, welcome to Hillsborough right there at Jackson School.
We have someone speaking here.
I'm seeing the misinformation. I really said, I am part of receiving things, but I'm seeing so much misinformation. So people that live here, they're close-ended by voices of people that don't live here. And it's just lie after lie after lie of misinformation. And that's just so upsetting to know that no growth is smart growth. No growth is literally dooming North Plains. So I would like to see a visual of that doom, so that maybe that way people can understand that. Because literally no growth is smart growth, is stupid growth, whoever who called it smart growth, because it's the opposite of that. So how can we visualize that so people understand that too?
Thank you for that. We'll continue to think, I mean, obviously this process has been designed around providing education, but it's a real challenge. So I appreciate that. I do want to remind people again, number one, people aren't this isn't a vote, right? This isn't a legal vote. It's just more information for you all to
Right,
consider.
and that's because it's not a vote.
Right.
This is where that information needs to be put.
Right.
So that people get that information. I'm all about communication, and I'm all about talking with people that are not, those were conversations. My husband said he had the best conversation with people that were very close, came in very close-minded. But that's what it's about. It's about informing and having conversations about real information, not made up information. So.
Thank you so much. Mayor?
I would have to echo both Emily and Johanna. I think that it would be really impactful to see. I guess you could look at the no growth as, this is the consequence of no growth, and this is the consequence for mega growth, right? And then our task is to find a happy medium, right? And I like the two options that we have presented, like this option and then the other option. Both could work in both sorts of ways. I mean, there's advantages of having, housing on the east and housing on the north. I mean, we could talk about that, why, what that looks like. But I think that the no growth and the mega growth somehow need to be portrayed as maybe consequences, for folks who feel like no growth, right? And they look at the mega growth and go, well, I don't want that, and then the folks who are like, well, I want some growth, but we don't have any growth, then this is what no growth, I don't know. I mean, somehow showcase the both. I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, I am in agreement, but I'd also like to have somehow showcased the ONA, and what could happen, so that people understand that the numbers could go higher, they could go lower, doubtful, but they could go higher, and they won't have any control, and that we're paying twice So we will have lost a boatload of money and we'll have to pay a boatload of money again, so.
Thanks.
Can I put Sherry on the spot a little bit? Is
Sure.
there do any of these maps in particular speak to you from a Parks Board perspective? in
Absolutely,
particular?
we are very interested in a large park, especially around the lake area. So, that would be ideal.
Tom,
I do think we should show the 3 slides and use the original as a reference. I also think depending on what happens between now and the end of the year, showing the risk map Hillsborough takeover. Because if the governor takes action and all that land that's protected for the next 50 years goes away in terms of Hillsborough, then we can show that. If she doesn't take action, there's still gonna be a lot of people saying, well, this doesn't matter because this land's protected and they can't touch it. You guys are just. So I think that would be, to me, that would be the caveat of showing a Hillsborough takeover, because right now they can't touch it unless the governor takes it away. So if the governor takes it away, then I think that's beneficial. I can show everybody of what could happen.
thanks, Tom. Gary?
Well, my gut tells me that alternative 1, 2, and the original UGB should probably be proposed. The no growth, to me, is irrelevant on the table. I mean, if the majority of the folks out there now are set on no growth, why even have it on the table? That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Gary. Larry?
I think having all 4 options presented, what Tom, I think you mentioned, option A, the reference option, we need to let them know the existing UGB, and then option 1, 2, and 3, if you look at it that way, we need to let them know that we're gonna have to do this work again in order to implement those 3 options. That means the cost of, just kind of comment on that.
I'm hearing loud and clear from the group. I mean, it's not just a map that people are looking at. There needs to be a description
Yeah,
of
some context, right?
what it includes and what the implications are.
And then the other thing, and I think, I understand the no growth option, I get it, but no growth doesn't mean no growth. Bill, to your comments about, then there's gonna be infill. And infill means higher density. It means, 2, 3-story apartments or condos going in. And so the thinking that, I think portraying the option, the no growth option as no growth is kind of, it's not being accurate, right? We need to let people know that this includes, this is going to mean that the city is going to be pushed to infill.
We should call it no expansion.
No expansion, right?
Not no growth.
Yeah, but also, let people know, this is gonna include infill and higher density and higher buildings in order to accommodate the folks who want to live there.
Daniel?
I think three options. The no growth, I mean, if we're sitting here showing people, hey, we came up with another plan with no growth, right? It shouldn't even be needed. Right, because we don't have to decide anything. We just keep it the way it is. So we're here, I'm spending my time, everybody else is spending their time here. Let's show them 3 things that we came up with as alternatives. Obviously, the big one's gonna be out the door. But it gives us something to look at. I just think showing people, hey, we came up with no growth as an alternative. It isn't. It really is not an alternative. If I can put that other map of the Grand Banks in front of the door, when people walk in here and realize what's going on, I'd love to do that. But we got 3. I'm not happy with one or not happy with another one, but it is something I can look at.
Well, it's something you can react to. Really, that's what we're wanting, is people to react to things.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, I think having all 4 with the caveat of having some type of fact sheet or objective statements rather than a pro and con, and then to your point, that it would be up to them to decide what would be considered a pro and a con for each one.
Rudy?
I think there's only one smart alternative, that's the one that's showing there now. It is the one that represents smart growth. It's the most walkable, livable opportunity that the city has for the next expansion. Residential only on the east will rely heavily on a very expensive bridge to extend Pacific Avenue over to Camp Creek, which we don't know where the money's gonna come from. That has to go through wetlands and et cetera. So I think that this is absolutely the most balanced and is the smartest of all of it, and leads to best outcome for future expansions. Except for the 30-some acres south of the.
What do you think we should show the community in terms of alternatives? That's kind of the question on the table here.
That one.
Just one, just
yeah.
one.
I think it's the smartest one. I would be admitting I'm dumb if I go the other way.
Okay.
And I'm speaking from some experience as a master planner that has done some pretty good things. So this is the best balance that we've got, and all the alternatives are out there. No growth, as I said earlier, is not an option. You're gonna invite Hillsborough right into your backyard. And the other one, just with residential on the east, is limiting and isn't as walkable as adding residential and livable. Almost every trip generated out of the east residential is going to be by automobile, whereas residential on the north, a lot of those can be walkable to the town.
Thank you.
Dan Gervis, and I'm just sitting here, I think I sat at the table that were honor members of that nefarious group, because they basically just wanted to shut it all down and not participate at all. So I'm sitting here looking at these options, and I'm just trying to see how would they tear these apart. And I don't have a good idea exactly of how to do it, but I'm not a fan of just ignoring it. I tend to go on the offensive. And I would say, this is what you guys want. This is why it's stupid. And we need to portray why that doesn't work. Either whether it's an alternative or not, we just need to at least address why we chose that isn't a good alternative.
Are you referring to the no
The
expansion?
no expansion, yeah. And so what does that really mean? Because I come from a family that does development, and I know all the little idiosyncrasies, but there's so much information. I'm not even sure where to start. But one of the comments I remember is looking at the yellow and the blue that's kind of in that natural resource area. Someone said, "Oh, you can't build in that, so this whole map's wrong. You can't do this. This is old garbage." It's like, well, that's not exactly what this map means, but it's those little semantics that people get caught up in.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I'm trying to, I don't know a short answer of how to really fix it yet. But I like this one. I think it meets most of the needs or all the needs in a smart way.
Thanks.
Hamid, I think there would be 4 scenarios. One, whatever we got the feedback from the community, showing the reference point, and no expansion, showing the implications of the negative sides of that. That would be reference, not as an alternative option. But this one probably should tag it as a smarter alternative. That way we will be able to show that the people are talking about smart growth, we're hearing them as well, that we have something included as a smart option.
Thank you.
David, I agree with Jacqueline and some of the previous speakers that the options we present to the council should not include no growth. Yeah, if I would quote Rudy, what Rudy said, that growth we all know growth is inevitable. And if previous North Plain City Councils have, if they had approved of no growth, like I will not be here. I am here because of Bryan Hill development. There should be some form of growth, at all times. So I will not stick my neck out for one of them, but I think out of the four, no growth option should not be presented at all. So we should proceed with three. That is my submission.
I think if we're gonna sell something, that's the one that we can sell. And the thing the city has to understand is for 30 years, they've never sold anything. The water system. You have to get out to the people and you have to talk to people and you have to open up and show them what we have. And if we don't do it, we'll lose it. And it wasn't done well this time. The water system, when the water system came through, they had we could do a bond levy or we could pay off on the water bill. Well, look at your water bill. That's because the mentality of people is, I'll use less water. And that's what they said. And I just laughed at them. I said, I can write it off my taxes if it's on a bond bill, but I can't off my water bill. So you got to think smart about this. So we need to sell it. And I think everything I've heard from all the maps to sell it is the right idea, but we've got to get everybody in the city involved. I don't know how we're gonna do that, but we have to.
Thanks. Jacqueline?
I thought of an alternative.
Okay.
Well,
And I'm a housing advocate. And I started with thinking, well, of course, we're not gonna present a no growth option. That's dumb. Because we're about smart growth. I'm wondering about 4 options. And, okay, so before I tell you my 4, and an actual recommendation from this group of smart growth.
At least the way city council approved this process was that the recommendation, we're trying to hear from the community. The recommendation from this group comes after this next meeting.
Okay.
We will have this conversation and ask you all for a recommendation to go to planning commission and city council. The idea right now is to hear from community members about their preferences.
Okay, so I really liked your idea, the previously stated idea of the smart idea.
Mm-hmm.
My proposal is, even though it is not where I think we should go, that on this option, we remove that blue patch up on the north.
The blue on the north?
On
the north
school.
To the north west?
Okay. To solicit a reaction of less industrial.
Okay.
Because otherwise it makes it look like we're putting options that we're asking people to vote on. And I know that you say that, but I watched what happened last week. And what you got was people rendering opinions, not really talking about trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're focused on in the way we have it is just how many acres are coming in versus what you are getting and losing, and options that might even have balanced acres.
Great, thank you. Just a minute, Larry, if that's all right. This is great feedback. I mean, my proposed path forward, we heard all of you, in case I didn't mention it, Natalie from my office is online taking notes. We're recording this meeting. I would propose that Steve and Bill and I take what we heard from all of you, and we can let you know ahead of January 9th if you want, but kind of what we propose, and even the materials that we plan to use for that meeting, if that's okay with everyone. But we definitely kind of heard, I heard a lot of different things. I don't want to try to name them because there were enough of them, but maps, descriptions, the different opinions on how many alternatives, but in terms of how we present the information, I think I heard some some consensus. Larry, go ahead.
Okay, next steps. So when does the city council meet?
Okay, so that's my job, Larry.
Go ahead.
When does the city council? No, that was the other thing that we heard, that this group might want to, well, I don't think you have to go to city council to make a request for a work session. But going to city council is another way to kind of express whatever you want to express. So when is the city council?
It's January 6th. We always receive visitors and they're welcome to speak to about anything that's not on the agenda.
It's and to your point about requesting a work session, how would we do that? And then who here wants to do that?
That's what I would say. I would say, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, the group, if someone would volunteer and everyone's okay with it, someone from the group could make that request, or are they making it to you right now?
So I would take the request to have a work session. I can do that and work on it starting tonight. What I would say is this: January 6th is the first meeting of the new city council. That meeting is going to start off with gaveling in by the old city council, formed by the outgoing city council, and then the swearing in of the new elected officials, and then whatever else they decide to put on the agenda that evening. Work sessions normally are at 6 o'clock, but we won't have elected officials until 7:30. So what I would suggest is that if you all want to have a work session, I could more reliably plan it for something like, request that it be before city council like normal, the regular city council meeting at 6 o'clock, but that would mean it would need to be on Tuesday, January 21st, because it's first and third Monday of the month. The third Monday of January is Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, so it would need to be Tuesday evening, the 21st.
There could be 2 work sessions possibly that night too.
So that's what I would put forward, is that January 6th, that'll be swearing in, they won't be ready for it.
Is there anyone in the room that does not want to request a work session with city council? All right, can you make that request? Then?
Absolutely.
Daniel, go ahead, and then Tom.
I think being somebody who was sworn in at one of those council meetings, the impression we've made, we all showed up and just sat there. So, basically there is an open session in that. Once they take their deal, it becomes an open meeting, and they take deals. We just one by one say, we're gonna keep this going, we're gonna keep talking. And it was set in their mind right off the bat that it's not gonna be their way, it's gonna be how people in town want it to go. And, just from the stuff that we went through this last year with it, it's good to set that presence with this council coming up.
Thanks, Daniel. Tom?
My only thing is talking about incoming council, and our meeting is on the 9th, our first meeting is on the 6th. How do we keep the ad hoc committee together for the January 9th meeting without them killing it on the 6th?
So that's what I'm saying.
But we can send out we can send out both of these meeting dates and times so everyone has them.
Yeah, they ran on the deal. They're gonna be the community mouthpiece. Well, we're gonna be sitting here telling them this is what we're doing.
I mean,
it sets in their head.
To that point, public comment is a standard part of a business meeting for council. And so if more than one of you want to speak about this, then
I'm kind of curious how many people would show up.
Oh, are you asking people to raise their hands?
I'll be doing it. I'll be there.
It's my first day of school, bro.
You're just telling them you're on the relook deal and you're very serious about what you're doing. That's literally what it is. Oh, sure.
All right. Well, we've kept you a half an hour after, but we really had talked about a lot of important things tonight. So again, January 9th, one of the things I heard was, can we have some other times? So I'll talk to Bill and Steve about if we can do more than just January 9th. I don't know about that. We'll go back and work on the materials for this open house. Sounds like some folks are gonna go to city council on the 6th, and Bill will be requesting a work session on the 21st. And then I do want to stress that, you know, all this feedback is going to come to you. We haven't scheduled the meeting yet. I think it probably would be wise to do it after January 21st. And we're going to have a discussion to what Larry said and what Rudy said and others said. Here's what the community has told us. Now, let that inform our discussion about what we want this community to be. And if this group decides they need another meeting or want to request more meetings, you know, if we need more information, we'll kind of get to that when we get there. But that's the purpose of the next meeting of this group. Larry?
Quick thing is, if, for that January 6th meeting, if anybody wants to change your mind and show up.
Okay. Anything else from the group or from Steve and Bill?
One quick question, is there a way to share contact information or email addresses? Because I'm not sure that in the RAC emails that we get, I don't think everybody's listed, so maybe
Oh, I'm
if you
sorry.
want
Yeah.
to share, just let Bill know, Bill, you could, you know, I don't want everyone to feel like they have to be a part of that email, but it would be nice to communicate.
Before we adjourn, I apologize. We didn't ask for public comment. Public comment? Anyone online, public comment? I apologize for forgetting about that. Bill, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to say something. I'm sorry, I don't have my hand that often, but I would like to have the 4 maps, please, available. That's just my input. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was gonna say, this is the last meeting with Mayor Lenihan representing City Council. So thank you for being here. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay on.
Am I gonna stay?
You can stay with us.
I'm gonna be over there. I don't know if I'll be sitting here.
Thanks, everyone, for your extra time tonight. Thank you.